What started as a routine late-night interview exploded into television chaos when Stephen Colbert and George Clooney clashed over political donations, ending with Hollywood's biggest star storming off set in disgust. The studio lights dimmed as Stephen Colbert adjusted his tie, flashing that trademark smirk to the live audience. Tonight's guest was supposed to be a ratings goldmine, George Clooney, promoting his latest directorial effort while making his usual rounds of late-night television. The crowd erupted in applause as Clooney walked out, waving with the effortless charm that had made him one of Hollywood's most beloved figures. "George Clooney, everybody," Colbert announced, rising from behind his desk with arms extended. "The man who makes us all feel inadequate just by existing." Clooney settled into the guest chair, laughing easily. "Stephen, always a pleasure. Though I have to say, your opening monologue tonight was particularly brutal to the current administration." The comment hung in the air longer than expected. Colbert's smile flickered almost imperceptibly before returning full force. "Well, that's what we do here, George. We call it like we see it, right? But don't you think there's a line between comedy and outright character assassination?" Clooney's tone remained light, but there was something sharper underneath. "I mean, some of those jokes tonight weren't just punching up. They felt personal." The audience murmured, sensing a shift in the conversation's temperature. Colbert leaned back in his chair, fingers drumming against his desk. "Personal? George, I think you might be reading too much into it. Comedy has always been about pushing boundaries." "Has it, though?" Clooney shifted forward, his movie star smile never wavering, but his eyes growing more intense. "Because I've been watching your show, Stephen, and I've noticed something interesting. You seem to have very strong opinions about certain political figures, but your criticism always seems to flow in one direction." The studio grew quiet. The audience was unsure whether this was part of an elaborate bit or if genuine tension was building between the two Hollywood heavyweights. Colbert's laugh sounded forced as he tried to steer the conversation back to safer territory. "Well, George, you know how it is in comedy. You go where the material takes you. And speaking of material, let's talk about your new film." But Clooney wasn't finished. "Actually, Stephen, since we're being candid here, I think your audience deserves to know about some of the material you choose not to cover, like the fundraiser you hosted last month for Senator Richardson's campaign. Interesting choice, considering his voting record on environmental issues." The color drained from Colbert's face. This wasn't public knowledge, or, at least, it wasn't supposed to be. The fundraiser had been a private affair, carefully kept out of the media to avoid exactly this kind of scrutiny. "I'm not sure what you're referring to, George. Come on, Stephen. Don't insult my intelligence or your audience's." Clooney's voice carried the weight of someone who has spent decades navigating Hollywood politics and wasn't about to be deflected by stammering denials. "Richardson has voted against every major climate initiative for the past 3 years. A cue, but you've never mentioned that on your show. Meanwhile, you tear apart politicians who actually support the causes you claim to care about." The audience was dead silent now, caught between fascination and discomfort as they watched what was supposed to be a light-hearted celebrity interview transform into something far more confrontational. Colbert's hands gripped the edge of his desk, his knuckles white with tension. "George, I think you're mixing up your facts here," Colbert said, his voice strained but still attempting to maintain professional composure. "And frankly, I'm not sure this is the appropriate venue for whatever political vendetta you're trying to pursue." "Political vendetta?" Clooney's eyebrows shot up, genuine surprise mixing with indignation. "Stephen, I'm talking about journalistic integrity. You position yourself as this truth-telling comedian, but you're just as selective with your outrage as any other talking head on television." The tension in the studio was palpable. Crew members behind the cameras exchanged worried glances as they realized this wasn't going according to script. Colbert's producer could be seen frantically gesturing from the wings, but both men were too locked in verbal combat to notice. "You know what, George?" Colbert said as his mask finally began to slip, his voice rising with barely contained anger. I don't need lectures about integrity from someone who's made Kara out of playing dress-up and pretending to be other people. The insult hit its mark. Clooney's composure cracked for the first time, his jaw tightening as he processed the dismissive attack on his profession. Playing dress-up. That's really how you see it. I see it as entertainment, which is what people tune in for, Colbert shot back, his professionalism evaporating completely. They don't need some overpaid actor trying to school them on politics between sips of his $100 coffee. The audience gasped audibly at the naked hostility now flowing between the two men. What had started as pointed questions about journalistic consistency had devolved into personal attacks, and neither seemed willing to back down. Clooney stood up slowly, his famous composure struggling to reassert itself as he processed the depth of Colbert's contempt. You know, Stephen, I came here tonight thinking we were going to have a conversation between professionals. I didn't realize I was walking into an ambush by someone so threatened by honest questions that he'd rather attack my character than address his own hypocrisy. Threatened. Colbert was on his feet now too, the pretense of a civil interview completely abandoned. The only thing threatening here is your ego, George. You can't handle that knot. Everyone worships at the altar of your political opinions just because you've got a pretty face and a nice smile. The studio erupted in uncomfortable murmurs as crew members scrambled to figure out how to handle the rapidly deteriorating situation. This was live television, okay? And every second of the confrontation was being broadcast, okay, to millions of viewers across the country. Clooney's eyes narrowed as he took a step closer to Colbert's desk. My ego. Stephen, you're the one who can't handle having your journalistic double standards called out on your own show. Colbert's face flushed red, his composure completely shattered. Double standards. You want to talk about double standards, George? Let's talk about how you lecture everyone about climate change while flying around in private jets. Let's talk about how you preach about wealth inequality from your $15 million Lake Como estate. The accusation struck deep, and Clooney's carefully maintained Hollywood diplomacy finally cracked. At least I'm consistent in my advocacy, Stephen. I don't pretend to be an objective journalist while secretly bankrolling politicians who contradict everything I claim to stand for on television. Objective journalist. Colbert laughed bitterly, the sound echoing strangely in the dead silent studio. I'm a comedian, George. A satirist. I never claimed to be Walter Cronkite. Okay. Then stop hiding behind comedy when people question your integrity. Clooney shot back, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. You can't have it both ways. You can't influence political discourse and then claim immunity from criticism because you tell jokes. The audience was transfixed, watching two titans of entertainment tear each other apart on live television. Social media was already exploding with clips and commentary, but neither man seemed aware that their careers were potentially imploding in real time. Colbert moved around his desk, closing the distance between himself and his guest. You know what your problem is, George. You think because you've played a few doctors and lawyers on screen, it makes you qualified to diagnose society's problems? But you're just another Hollywood elite who thinks his opinion matters more because he's famous, and you're just another media puppet who thinks he's above accountability because he makes people laugh. Clooney fired back, his famous charm completely evaporated. The difference is, I don't pretend to be something I'm not. Confrontation reached a fever pitch, with both men standing face to face in the center of the stage. The crew looked on helplessly as their carefully orchestrated show descended into chaos. Security personnel began moving closer to the set, unsure whether intervention was necessary. You want to know what I really think, George? Colbert's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper that somehow carried throughout the silent studio. I think you're a has-been actor, desperately trying to stay relevant by picking fights with people who actually matter in the cultural conversation. The insult landed like a physical blow. Clooney's hands clenched into fists at his sides, his legendary self-control hanging by a thread. Has been, Stephen. I've been making meaningful films while you've been making cheap shots from behind a desk. At least when I take on important issues, I put my money where my mouth is. Meaningful films. Colbert scoffed. You mean vanity projects that nobody watches? When's the last time you had a real hit, George? When's the last time you were relevant for anything other than marrying a lawyer? The audience gasped at a personal attack on Clooney's wife. Several people in the front row looked visibly uncomfortable, and a few began reaching for their phones to record what was clearly spiraling out of control. Clooney's voice turned ice cold. Leave my family out of this, Stephen. We're talking about your professional ethics, not my personal life. Professional ethics. Colbert was practically shouting now, all pretense of television professionalism abandoned. You come on my show in front of my audience and try to destroy my reputation based on rumors and gossip. Where are your professional ethics? I came on your show to promote a film and have a conversation. Clooney replied, his voice steady despite the fury burning in his eyes. You're the one who turned this into a character assassination. You couldn't handle being asked legitimate questions about your journalistic practices. The standoff continued, both men refusing to back down. Behind the cameras, producers frantically tried to salvage the situation. The show's director was making cutting motions across his throat, but neither Colbert nor Clooney seemed to notice or care. Legitimate questions? Colbert's laugh was sharp and humorless. You ambushed me with unsubstantiated accusations about private fundraisers. That's not journalism, George. That's a hit job. Unsubstantiated. Clooney pulled out his phone, fingers moving quickly across the screen. Would you like me to show your audience the photos from Richardson's fundraiser? The ones with you giving the keynote speech about the importance of pragmatic politics. The blood drained from Colbert's face as he realized Clooney had come prepared. This wasn't a spontaneous argument. It was a calculated exposure planned in advance. You recorded a private event. Colbert's voice cracked with rage and panic. I documented a public figure's hypocrisy, Clooney corrected, his thumb hovering over his phone screen. The question is, do you want to explain to your audience why you've been secretly supporting politicians whose policies contradict everything you claim to believe? Or should I just post these photos and let them draw their own conclusions? The threat hung in the air like a loaded weapon. Colbert's face cycled through panic, rage, and desperation before settling on something darker. His voice dropped to a menacing whisper that carried across the silent studio. You post those photos, George, and I'll make sure every major network in this town knows exactly what kind of guest you really are. You think your little art house films will get distributed when word gets out that you secretly record private events? You think anyone will want to work with someone who betrays professional trust? Clooney's grip tightened on his phone, but his expression remained resolute. Go ahead, Stephen. Threaten my career. It just proves everything I've been saying about your character. Character. Colbert exploded, his voice echoing through the studio speakers. You want to talk about character? You came here under false pretenses, armed with illegally obtained photographs, ready to destroy someone's reputation on live television. And you have the audacity to lecture me about integrity. The accusation of illegal activity was the final straw. Clooney's composure shattered completely as he stepped closer to Colbert, their faces now inches apart. Illegally obtained. Stephen, you gave a speech at a public fundraiser. There were 200 people there, including reporters. The only thing illegal here is your attempt to hide your hypocrisy from the people who trust you. Trust? Colbert's laugh was bitter and desperate. You've just destroyed any trust between guest and hosts in this entire industry. Congratulations, George. You've turned late-night television into an ambush zone. I've exposed a fraud. Clooney shot back, his voice carrying the weight of righteous anger. You sit behind that desk every night, judging politicians and public figures, demanding transparency and honesty from everyone except yourself. Your audience deserves to know who you really are. The studio audience watched in stunned silence as two of entertainment's biggest names engaged in what could only be described as professional mutual destruction. Several audience members had their phones out, recording every moment of the carnage. Colbert's producer finally worked up the courage to approach the stage, kinda shatically for a commercial break, but Colbert waved him off with violent dismissal, too consumed by rage to care about television protocol. "You know what, George?" Colbert's voice carried a finality that sent chills through everyone present. "Post your little photos. Expose whatever you think you've exposed. But when you're done playing investigative journalist, I want you off my stage and out of my studio. Security." The call for security was the breaking point. Clooney straightened his jacket with deliberate precision, some movie star composure reasserting itself even as fury burned in his eyes. "I don't need security to escort me, Stephen. Unlike you, I have enough dignity to walk away from this disaster on my own." He turned toward the audience, his voice carrying clearly through the silent studio. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize that you had to witness this. You came here for entertainment, and instead, you've got a masterclass in what happens when power goes unchecked and ego trumps integrity. Don't you dare grandstand to my audience," Colbert snarled, moving toward Clooney. "You don't get to play the victim after ambushing me on my own show." Clooney turned back one final time, his voice cold and measured. "Stephen, the only victim here is late-night television itself. You've just shown America what happens when satirists start believing their own mythology." With that, George Clooney walked across the stage toward the exit, each step deliberate and dignified despite the chaos he was leaving behind. The audience remained frozen, unsure whether to applaud, boo, or simply process what they had witnessed. Colbert stood alone center stage, his face flushed and breathing heavy. The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity before he finally turned back to his desk, his movements robotic and defeated. "We'll be right back," he managed to croak out, though his voice barely carried to the back of the studio as the applause sign lit up. The audience's response was scattered and confused. Some clapped hesitantly, others sat in stunned silence, and a few whispered urgently to their companions about what they had just witnessed behind the cameras. Crew members scrambled to figure out how to handle the aftermath. The show's director was already on his phone with network executives, while social media coordinators watched in horror as clips of the confrontation spread across the internet at lightning speed. The confrontation had lasted less than 20 minutes, but in that time, two careers had been forever altered. Colbert's reputation as a trusted voice in political commentary lay in ruins. Case exposed as a hypocrite who couldn't handle the same scrutiny he regularly applied to others. Clooney, meanwhile, revealed himself to be far more calculated and ruthless than his charming public persona suggested, willing to destroy a colleague to make a point about journalistic integrity. As the studio lights dimmed for a commercial break, both men had received exactly what they deserved, a public reckoning that would follow them for the rest of their careers. The entertainment industry had witnessed something unprecedented. Two of its biggest stars committing professional suicide on live television, each convinced they were fighting for principle while actually revealing the worst aspects of their own character. The aftermath would dominate entertainment news for weeks, with declining ratings for Colbert's show and damaged relationships throughout Hollywood for Clooney. Neither man had won the confrontation. They had simply destroyed each other in the most public way possible, leaving their audiences to wonder if anyone in entertainment could truly be trusted.